He came to his son's grave the same way he always did, alone, silent and broken inside. But that morning, something stopped him cold.
A poor waitress and a small girl were kneeling at the gravestone, praying through tears, whispering words meant for heaven.
He felt anger, confusion, and pain all at once. Why were strangers mourning his child? As he listened from a distance, his heart began to race, because their prayer revealed a truth he had never known about his own son. A truth so powerful, it would change his life forever. What he discovered next would shatter his guilt, rewrite his past, and prove that even after death, love still speaks. The first thing he noticed was the sound of prayer, soft and trembling, carried by the cold morning air of the cemetery. It stopped him mid-step, his polished shoes sinking slightly into damp grass as his eyes fixed on a small, forgotten corner near his son's grave. There, beneath a gray sky heavy with grief, stood a waitress in a worn uniform and a little girl clutching her hand, their heads bowed, tears falling silently onto the earth that held the most painful memory of his life. In that moment, the billionaire who owned half the city felt something crack inside his chest, something money had never been able to heal. Before this story pulls you deeper into heartbreak and hope, take a moment to like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel if you believe in kindness and second chances. And please comment below if you believe even broken lives can still be guided by compassion. For years, the billionaire had visited the grave alone. He came in silence, always early, always leaving before anyone noticed him. The grave belonged to his only son, taken by a sudden accident that shattered a life built on control, power, and certainty. The world knew him as a ruthless businessman, a man who bent markets and crushed competitors. But no one knew the hollow space inside him that screamed every night when the city lights dimmed. Since the funeral, the grave had become his confession booth, the only place where the weight of his failures as a father pressed down hard enough to make him breathe. That morning was supposed to be no different. He arrived with fresh flowers, his face locked in its usual mask of stone. But then he heard the prayer. It wasn't polished or practiced. It was desperate, raw, filled with words that stumbled over each other as if pulled straight from a wounded heart. The little girl beside the woman pressed her forehead to the gravestone, her small shoulders shaking, as though she had lost someone too. Though the name etched in marble belonged to a family she should never have known, the billionaire stayed hidden behind a tall monument, watching. The woman looked exhausted, her hair pulled back without care, her hands rough and red from work. The uniform told him she was a waitress, someone the world rarely looked at twice. Yet the way she prayed, the way she clung to the earth above his son, carried a tenderness he hadn't felt in years. It made his chest tighten with confusion and something dangerously close to anger. Why were they here? What right did strangers have to grieve at his son's grave? As he watched, memories surged uninvited. His son as a child, laughing, running through a garden that now felt like it belonged to another lifetime. His son as a teenager, distant, resentful, angry at a father who replaced bedtime stories with board meetings and love with money. The accident had ended any chance of repair. Since then, guilt had become the billionaire's shadow, following him everywhere, whispering that all his success meant nothing. The woman and child stayed for a long time. They cleaned the area around the grave, brushing away fallen leaves, straightening flowers left by others. It was an intimacy that felt both intrusive and sacred. The billionaire's heart pounded as questions swirled in his mind. When they finally rose to leave, the little girl kissed her fingers and pressed them gently against the cold stone, a gesture so pure it made his vision blur. Unable to contain himself, he stepped forward. The sound of his presence startled them. The woman turned, fear flickering across her face when she recognized him. Everyone in the city knew his face. Wealth had made him famous, but grief had aged him beyond recognition. She held the girl closer, as if bracing for judgment or punishment. He studied them in silence, his authority filling the space like a storm cloud. Then he asked the question that had burned inside him from the moment he heard their prayer. Why were they praying at his son's grave? The woman's eyes filled with tears, but she did not look away. Her gaze held something steady, something honest. She explained that years ago, before the accident, his son had worked part-time at the small diner where she waited tables. He had come in often, not as a billionaire's heir, but as a quiet young man trying to escape the weight of expectations. He had listened when she spoke about her struggles, about raising a daughter alone, about nights when she went to bed hungry so her child could eat. He had been kind, she said, in a way that didn't feel forced or charitable. He had helped her when no one else noticed she was drowning. She told him that on the night of the accident, his son had been driving her home after a late shift because she couldn't afford a cab. The little girl had been sick, and she was exhausted, scared to walk alone. The accident happened on that road. His son died instantly. She survived, carrying a lifetime of guilt. The little girl survived too, though she barely remembered the night. Only the warmth of the man who had told her everything would be okay. The truth hit the billionaire like a physical blow. The air seemed to leave his lungs as the pieces of a story he never knew fell into place. His son, the boy he had accused of being irresponsible and unfocused, had been quietly saving someone else's life. He had died not in recklessness, but in compassion. The waitress continued, her voice breaking, explaining that she visited the grave to say thank you, to apologize, to pray for the soul of the man who gave everything without asking for recognition. She said she prayed that the father he left behind would find peace, even though she had no right to ask such a thing. The billionaire felt his knees weaken. For the first time since the funeral, tears fell freely down his face. They soaked into the soil as he knelt beside the grave, no longer caring about dignity or image. All his life he had believed love was proven through provision, through money and security. But here was proof that his son had learned a different language of love, one the billionaire himself had never spoken fluently. Days turned into weeks, and the image of the woman and child never left his mind. He began to see the world differently. Faces he once ignored now carried stories he wondered about. The city he owned felt less like a kingdom and more like a place filled with invisible pain. He found the diner where the waitress worked. He watched from afar as she moved from table to table, smiling through exhaustion, carrying burdens no one paid for. He learned how close she lived to the edge, how one illness or missed paycheck could unravel everything. And he realized how easily his son had slipped into that world, not to dominate it, but to help. The billionaire made changes quietly at first. He ensured the woman and her daughter would never worry about rent or food again, though he never revealed himself as the benefactor. He funded scholarships in his son's name, created shelters, supported single parents struggling like she once had. But even as his wealth began to heal wounds, something inside him still felt unresolved. One morning, he returned to the grave with the woman and child by his side. This time there was no distance between them. They stood together, united by loss and gratitude. The little girl held his hand, her fingers small but steady, as if she understood that this broken man needed grounding too. In that quiet space, the billionaire finally allowed himself to forgive, not the world, not fate, but himself. He accepted that while he had failed in many ways as a father, his son had become someone extraordinary despite it, not because of wealth, but because of empathy. If this story is touching your heart right now, please pause and comment below before the ending. Share what kindness means to you, or who changed your life when you needed it most. Years later, people would speak of the billionaire's transformation as a miracle. They saw the charities, the softer interviews, the way his name became associated with hope instead of fear. But the real miracle was quieter, living in moments unseen by the world. It lived in Sunday dinners where a lonely man laughed with a grown girl who called him family. It lived in the simple truth that grief, when met with compassion, can reshape even the hardest hearts. Near the end of his life, the billionaire visited the grave one last time. The stone no longer felt cold. It felt like a bridge between who he had been and who he had become. He knelt, placed his hand over his son's name, and whispered a prayer of gratitude, not for the loss, but for the lesson hidden within it. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that love often lives in unexpected places, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel. Your engagement helps keep stories like this alive, stories that remind us kindness can outlive pain, and second chances can grow from the deepest sorrow.